Hey Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today's topic actually comes to us from my wife. We were watching a marathon of Lord of the Rings, once a month or so. TNT's got that little marathon running, and we were in. Let's watch the marathon again. And near the end of Return of the King, obviously, you've got the Grey Haven scene where Frodo and Bilbo are heading off to the west, to the Undying Lands. And my wife asked a very interesting question. If Gollum had somehow survived the War of the Ring, would he count as a Ringbearer and thus be able to pass off to the Undying Lands? I did not know the answer to that question, so I had to research it, and in fact, I found some really fascinating information. Okay, first, let's establish how Frodo, Bilbo, and Sam all got to go to the Undying Lands themselves, right? I mean, for instance, they're not the only Ringbearers, right? Of course, the longest running Ringbearer would have been Sauron. That would have been a little awkward, to have Sauron get on a boat and head west, had he survived somehow. He was a ring bearer, technically. But yeah, so probably not, Sauron wouldn't have qualified. Isildur, then obviously, after the ring was cut from Sauron's hand, Isildur had the ring for a few years. He was actually on his way to give the ring to Elrond, ostensibly to have it destroyed, at the time that he was killed and the ring was lost. So you could almost say, hey, in terms of someone who had the ring and was, at least somewhat intent on resisting its power and having it destroyed, Isildur would count. But, he died, so it was a little too late for him to go to the Undying Lands. Then, of course, you've got Daigle, Smaug's brother, finds the ring. He's only got it for a few moments. He was technically a ring bearer as well, and was killed for his efforts by his brother. Smaug then turns into Gollum, but had it for almost 500 years. Then gives it up to Bilbo. Bilbo keeps it for another 60 years or so. Then it goes to Frodo. Goes to Sam for a couple of days. And so what we see is that at the end, it's Frodo and Bilbo go to the west, and then Sam stays behind, and it's 60-ish years later, I think 61 of the Fourth Age, I believe, is when his wife passes on, and he takes the boat west at that point. So he's like 102, I think, at that time. So how did those three get to go, get this special dispensation? Typically only elves get to go to the west. And there's a letter from Tolkien in which he kind of spells this out pretty carefully in a footnote. What ends up happening is Arwen, seeing the hurt that Frodo still has after the War of the Ring is over, basically makes a press to have him go to the west. There's an implication that she gives up her seat on the boat, but that's not really her seat to give. That's not really the way it works. And so here, I'm going to read you this passage from Tolkien's letter in which he spells out exactly how this worked. Okay. For any except those of elvish race, sailing west was not permitted, and any exception required authority. And Arwen was not in direct communication with the Valar, especially not since her choice to become mortal. What is meant is that it was Arwen who first thought of sending Frodo into the west, and put in a plea for him to Gandalf. No doubt it was Gandalf who was the authority that accepted her plea. Alas, there are some wounds that cannot be wholly cured, said Gandalf. Not in Middle-earth. Frodo was sent or allowed to pass over the sea to heal him, if that could be done before he died. He would have eventually to pass away. No mortal could or can abide forever on earth or within time. Bilbo went too, no doubt as a completion of the plan due to Gandalf himself. Okay, so there's a couple of interesting things there. One, seems like so Arwen made a plea to Gandalf. Gandalf said, "Okay, on behalf of the Maiar, I will grant authority to have Frodo come to the west to heal his wounds, and I will also take Bilbo with me." I'm going to guess that Sam, maybe even Frodo, mentioned like Sam deserves to go as well, and Gandalf agreed and gave authority for Sam to also come west, in his own time. But note here, this is something that I didn't really know till recently, because they're going to the Undying Lands. Undying Lands makes it sound like, heaven, maybe like, hey, I'll never die, I have an everlasting life. It's not the case. Again, I'll read this passage. He would have eventually to pass away. No mortal could or can abide forever on earth. So what he's saying there is going to the Undying Lands does not mean that you live forever. The Undying, I believe, are the actual spirits that are already, the Valar that are living there. But if a mortal being, a la Frodo, a la Bilbo and Sam, come to that land, their wounds spiritually and physically are healed, but they will live out a natural lifespan and still pass away. Which makes you wonder, by Sam waiting 60 years or so before he goes to the west, I'd like to hope that Frodo was still around, let's put it that way, when he gets there. Could be, but it would be a real shame if Sam got all the way west and realized, I would assume Bilbo would have passed on by then, and that hopefully Frodo was still hanging in there and they could have a reunion when Sam arrived in the west. So there you go. That's why those three individuals got to go to the west. Now Gollum, he was also a hobbit once upon a time, one of the stores, hobbits that lived near Gladden Fields. Gladden Fields, the disastrous Gladden Fields, is where the ring was lost. Obviously, that's why Gollum was in, or Sméagol was in the area and was able to acquire the ring. It's 2430 of the Third Age is when Sméagol is born. There's it's not 100% clear, but if you were to pull up a timeline, let's say Google Third Age timeline, which I did, you're going to get 2430 as the date that Sméagol was born. He was actually his grandmother was the matriarch of this area, so he was kind of upper class for that time. He was well off for the hobbits of that area. And of course, he talks about, my birthday present. It was on his birthday, in what appears to be 2463, that, Daigle, he and Daigle, his brother, go fishing. Daigle finds the ring. Sméagol immediately is entranced by it, kills his brother, takes the ring. Interesting note here, and this was one of the things that I guess I should have always known, but I didn't until I started really looking at dates. Okay, but so 2430, Sméagol's born. 2463 on his birthday is when he gets the ring. That means it was on his 33rd birthday that Sméagol got the Ring of Power. Well, that's an exact parallel to Mr. Frodo Baggins, who at the beginning of Lord of the Rings is having his 33rd birthday, and it's Bilbo who, under the tutelage of Gandalf, bequeaths the ring to Frodo. So we see that parallel of Sméagol and Frodo, both of these hobbits on their 33rd birthday, which is kind of their coming of age, when they acquire this Ring of Power. Now, obviously, they acquire it in different ways, and that's probably the main divergence here, is that Sméagol acquires the ring through violence, does an unspeakable act, kills his own brother for this ring, whereas Bilbo, more or less voluntarily, hands the ring off to Frodo. And so Frodo acquires it in a non-violent way. It's Sméagol then, now that he's killed his brother, kind of, doesn't cop to it. It's like, I don't know what happened to him, he disappeared. Starts using the ring for kind of nefarious purposes, spying on people, stealing and such in the area, until his matriarch grandmother, probably thinking also, hey, didn't you go fishing with Daigle and now Daigle has never been seen again? Probably blames Sméagol for that as well, rightfully so. Exiles him from the area. So he ends up going to the Misty Mountains, and of course stays there for hundreds of years. The fact that it's 2463 is the year that Sméagol gets the ring. It's 2460 is when Sauron moves back to Dol Guldur, the fortress in Mirkwood, which is pretty close to that area, to the Gladdenfields area. And so I get the implication, I think, is that the ring was ready to be found again. Now that Sauron, who had been chased away, was back in play, it was time that the ring was trying to get back to its master. And so, hence, Daigle finds the ring, Sméagol gets it, goes into the Misty Mountains. It was probably not necessarily what the ring wanted, was to be isolated away in a cave for hundreds of years, which is also why then when Bilbo happens upon this area, the ring quickly finds its way off of Gollum's hand so that it can get back into circulation, essentially, that it's not just trapped in this mountain forever. Obviously the ring is taken by Bilbo in 2941, when he takes the ring. Gollum then tries to search for that ring. In doing so, he ends up in Mordor, where he's captured and interrogated, I believe, in person by Sauron. Actually, Sauron realizes how important Gollum might be, and so, in person tortures him for information about Bilbo. Then releases him with the idea, I think, of tracking him and letting him, cause mischief. Gollum is then captured by Aragorn, brought to Gandalf, and he's kept with the elves. He's interrogated again, essentially. His life is not great after being entranced by this ring. There's that notion, too, obviously, of the Gollum personality. There's the Gollum versus Sméagol. The movies depict it so well. Andy Serkis does a great job at showing the duality of this character. Really one of the more fascinating characters in literature. This duality, constantly fighting with his own nature. It's the Sméagol part of him, the Hobbit, who really hadn't done anything horrible, as far as we know, up to that moment when he saw the ring and was just, incited to horrible violence in that moment. That part of him is the part that, if that could somehow survive, perhaps that part of him would be worthy of this trip to the Undying Lands, this gift, because he bore that ring for 500-ish years. I mean, that's just think of how much time they would have spent with the ring's power just coursing through him, corrupting him. Just the amount of damage that did to this individual is huge. There's one thought is, well, there's no way that Sméagol could have survived this event. Well, first of all, he's in a volcano. That doesn't help much when you're in lava. You probably aren't going to survive. There aren't going to be enough of you left to find to put on a boat to go to the west. But the other point is that, let's say he hadn't gone, he threw the ring in the volcano, and he and Frodo and Sam all escaped together. The idea is, it's a pretty strong implication. It's not 100% here, but I think the implication is that his long lifespan is tied to the ring in such a way that when the ring is destroyed, he would instantly age up, and being, over 500 years old, he would just immediately decay and turn into dust. In fact, he says as much. There's a quote from him in Return of the King. He's on Mount Doom, and he's kind of begging for his life in that moment. And he says, "Don't kill us," he wept. "Don't hurt us with nasty cold steel. Let us live. Yes, live just a little longer. Lost, we're lost. And when precious goes, we'll die. Yes, die into the dust." So right there's that sense that his lifespan is attached to the ring. Ring destroyed, he dies. There'd be nothing left for him to, again, you have to sweep him up in ashes and then put him on the boat. There's a little confusion because I think Peter Jackson's movies, I'm not going to say it's wrong, it's just an interpretation, and you can probably find some support for this interpretation in the books, but I think it's perhaps not correct. His interpretation is that the ring, just having it while you have it, your lifespan is increased, and as soon as you lose it, your lifespan goes back to correct itself. We see that with Bilbo in the movies, where he gives up the ring because he's old. He gives up, and he looks young. Gives up the ring, and the next time we see him in Rivendell, he's really old. Right, and he's kind of decrepit. But if that logic played out, then Gollum had done without the ring for 60 years or so, after having had it for 400 plus years. So he should have instantly died as soon as Bilbo took the ring from him. So I feel like the actual way the ring's power works in the situation is it prolongs the life of anyone who wears it, pretty much indefinitely, as long as the ring is still intact. And as soon as the ring was destroyed, Gollum would have poofed into dust practically, and it probably aged up Bilbo in that moment, that he kind of instantly aged quite a bit, so that he was, kind of the old man that we see in the movies at the end when he's going to the Grey Havens. That's probably accurate, based on what the ring would have done to him when it was destroyed. So as a practical matter, Gollum couldn't have possibly survived the downfall of the ring in order to go to the west. That was an impossibility. But kind of interesting to think, is there a way that he could have been deserving of, say, this gift of being able to pass to the Undying Lands? Had he found some way to survive, could he have been considered for this gift? Based on the way the events unfolded, I'd say no. Right? It's not. He gives into the Gollum persona, and bites Frodo's finger off, and it's kind of an accident that he ends up falling into the volcano and destroying the ring. However, in one of Tolkien's letters, he describes potentially a very different ending for Gollum that I think is relevant to this discussion. So I'm going to read you some of the excerpts from this right now. Okay. Sam plainly did not fully understand Frodo's motives or his distress in the incident of the Forbidden Pool. If he had understood better what was going on between Frodo and Gollum, things might have turned out differently in the end. For me, perhaps the most tragic moment in the tale comes in the Two Towers, when Sam fails to note the complete change in Gollum's tone and aspect. His repentance is blighted, and all Frodo's pity is, in a sense, wasted. Shelob's lair became inevitable. So I'm going to read you the passage that he's talking about from the book, but just to sum up what he's talking about here. There's this moment when Gollum is looking over the sleeping forms of Frodo and Sam, and he's got this plan, obviously. I'm going to lure Frodo into Shelob's lair. When she kills him, I'm going to take the ring off his corpse. And he's considering in this moment, maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe I should actually help, aid Frodo, and do the right thing. But Sam wakes up in this moment and kind of says the wrong thing at the wrong time and derails this momentary thought of Sméagol kind of taking over, and instead Gollum comes back and takes over. So this is the passage from the book. Gollum looked at them. A strange expression passed over his lean, hungry face. The gleam faded from his eyes, and they went dim and gray, old and tired. And he came back, and slowly, putting out a trembling hand, very cautiously, he touched Frodo's knee. But almost the touch was a caress. For a fleeting moment, could one of the sleepers have seen him, they would have thought that they beheld an old, weary hobbit, shrunken by the years that had carried him far beyond his time, beyond friends and kin and the fields and streams of yore, an old, starved, pitiable thing. But at that touch, Frodo stirred and cried out softly in his sleep, and immediately Sam was wide awake. The first thing he saw was Gollum, pawing at his master as he thought. "Hey, you," he said roughly. "What are you up to?" "Nothing, nothing," said Gollum softly. "Nice master." So you can see that Tolkien places a lot of importance on this one moment. He says it's perhaps the most tragic moment in his story, that there's this fleeting moment when maybe if things go just perfect, Sméagol takes over and changes the course of the story. So Tolkien goes on in this letter to describe what would have happened had Sméagol taken over in that moment. First, he basically says, there was no way Sam was going to act any differently. The story has its own logic, and so that wasn't what happened. But if it had, he says, what would have happened? The course of the entry into Mordor and the struggle to reach Mount Doom would have been different, and so would the ending. Certainly at some point, not long before the end, Gollum would have stolen the ring or taken it by violence. But possession satisfied, I think he would then have sacrificed himself for Frodo's sake and have voluntarily cast himself into the fiery abyss. So there's Tolkien himself saying there was this chance that Sméagol could have actually done this really, really heroic act. And in so doing, I think, obviously he'd be quite dead, lava taking him out. But I think he would have been worthy in that moment, in that leap, that conscious leap to destroy the ring, to aid Frodo and get back at Sauron. That leap would have made him worthy of receiving this gift to go to the Undying Lands to heal those horrible, horrible wounds that he had received over 500 years of ring usage. So there you go, Gollum. Probably not worthy of going to the Undying Lands, but in Tolkien's own words, he actually created a scenario in which I think Gollum could have been worthy of such a gift. So yeah, if you've got some thoughts on Gollum's worthiness to go to the Undying Lands, feel free to put them in the comments. Also, if you've got any other topics you'd like me to talk about, I'd be happy to discuss a topic of your choice. So thanks so much, everybody, and we will talk to you next time.